Welcome back to Reform Millennials, a podcast where we discuss the intersection of markets, politics, and pop culture. Please remember that the content of this show is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing should be considered financial or tax advice. Please consult a professional before you make any investment decisions. Good morning, Mel. How are you doing?
Morning, Joel. I'm doing well. How are you? It's a State of the Union morning. I mean, political heaven for me.
Imagine I'll even tune into it. I might watch some snippets, but
that's okay.
In any case, big weekend for me. It turns out, based on some of the research reports that were released, that the economic rules of the next decade are being rewritten. And by 2028, AI will either trigger a white-collar depression, or it's going to remove effectively all margin and intelligence taxes from the economy, and it's going to spark a massive surge in standard of living and purchasing power. One or the other. That is effectively where the market lies at this current moment. It's quite anxiety-inducing, if I don't say so myself. However, I think these market inflections are always, I think, the most important and exciting part of my job. So I have to say that this weekend was, one, important, but also it's pretty fun for me.
Yeah, it really does seem like every week that we talk, there's a new shift in global world order and the rules of the game are changing. So I think we're going to talk a lot about that today. I think, the skills that we are going to be using and deploying to actually better understand markets and politics aren't really building those long-term plans and sticking with them. It's really going to be more that dynamism and that ability to respond to the rapid environment that we're in. So it's this weekend's news and what we're looking into today is probably no different.
Yeah, absolutely. So I had to quickly update my notes to include the new tariff ruling. However, I want to, before jumping into our perception of where we're headed as we litigate the 2028 research reports, here's what's currently happening in markets right now. I believe the best way to define things right now is that the current tape is trying to find its identity. It's a trend market for sure. However, it's currently lacking that momentum and direction. And so I'm following and trying to flesh out a few of the key themes. So we have this software versus hardware divergence. There's been a number of financial commentary folks out there that are calling for this haloism of companies in which are unaffected by artificial intelligence. And as a result of that, their multiples are growing. We have been on this podcast, and I have in some of my writing and notes and memos to clients, been talking about the AI bifurcation and it's very clear that technicals are confirming this. Software stocks have been showing incredible weakness. If you look at any of these charts since the summer, they have significantly diverged from semiconductor names that have consolidated and held up incredibly well. The market narrative is finally catching up on this price action, and this weekend is no different. We tonight get earnings from NVIDIA and Salesforce, Wednesday night from NVIDIA and Salesforce. That is going to be a major tell for this divergence I'm speaking of. Right now, an underlying and what is perhaps a canary in the coal mine sort of event. We have private credit showing some warning signs. Blue Owl has started to trade very divergent from its competitors. That tends to be a concerning moment, and I think speaks to the reason for the VIX being slightly elevated, well above or a little bit above 20 right now. Credit spreads are fine at the moment. When you look at publicly traded equity firms, though, they're looking very weak. So if you look at the Blackstones, the Apollos, the KKRs, they're showing some significant weakness from a trading perspective. The consumer disconnect, I think this is something that is some corners of the market is talking about. Real GDP in the US and Canada broadly looks pretty good, but if you're looking under the hood and you look at real incomes and you're looking at housing starts and and some of the employment data coming out of restaurants, et cetera, it's starting to break down a bit. And I believe that this will be the catalyst for rate cuts in the US. But until we see a confirmation of who's going to be the new Fed chair and whether it's Moran or not, I don't believe we're going to get much signal on the direction of rates before summertime. And that is going to be a problem because mortgage rates have fallen back to the 2022 lows, but housing demand isn't surging. And we should have seen that by now, given the reduction in rates. And I think that this might actually unlock the real estate inventory, which is going to then make it even more challenging for house builders. You have folks that are finally going to be willing to remortgage. And with that, it's going to take away some of that demand that these home builders have seen over the last, call it 18 months. And this will be a little bit of a handoff to you, Mel. The noise from Washington, D.C. is going to be in full force this evening. Hopefully we can have this podcast out before then, but I anticipate it's going to be a very loud and noisy State of the Union. We finally got a fairly conclusive ruling regarding tariffs. And I believe that in the United States, while there's wars on many fronts, that the real core voting issue still remains affordability, and tariffs specifically addresses this. And I believe that while the geopolitical situation is a lot of noise and very important, especially as a Canadian, the political side in the United States specifically still, I think, is a question that surrounds itself around the idea of affordability. And obviously tariffs, it has an immediate impact on the cost of goods. And so, Mel, please kind of give a little bit of insights into where we're at on the tariff front, and we can kind of build off of that.
Yes. So switching gears and talking a little bit about American politics, insofar as it does highly impact Canadian politics, and especially on this tariff decision. So you're correct. We're recording in the morning of February 24th this evening at 9 p.m. Eastern. The president will give his annual once-a-year address to a joint session of Congress. So members of the House of Representatives as well as the Senate will sit and hear his State of the Union and update on how his administration is going. A couple of sort of political factors that are surrounding this address before we get into talking about some of the tariff specifics. So the United States is actually celebrating its 250th birthday this year. So that's a big sort of milestone in the country's existence with everything that's happened in the US. Sometimes we don't realize, it is still a fairly young country, older than Canada, but a fairly young country. So 250th birthday this year. We also have midterm elections coming up in November, where all 435 seats in the House of Representatives will turn over. And then about 30% of the seats in the Senate, which is a total of 100 seats, so about 35 seats will turn over as well. So big political year. The State of the Union, we always say it's a transformational State of the Union address, but there's definitely a lot going on in the United States right now, and definitely a lot riding on what the president says tonight and what also world leaders, namely Canada and other countries that have a vested interest in the United States, what we can glean from what the president is saying in terms of the direction of his administration. So we can get into talking a little bit about the politics of that, but there's always a lot of pomp and circumstance to it. I'm sure we'll have more to say in a couple of weeks when we return. To get into the specifics on what happened on the tariff decision that came out a few days ago. So the high level, too long didn't read version of this is that the Supreme Court of the United States has found that Trump does not have the legal authority to impose some of those sweeping tariffs that he imposed on Canada and other countries because he does not have the authority. Of course, not to get into a whole history lesson, but the United States, just like Canada, has a separation of powers. So you have the executive branch, which is where the president resides, the legislative branch, which is where the Senate and the House of Representatives, and then as well the judiciary, which is the branch of government that's made the decision on how Trump is acting. So essentially, to just give a short update on where we were at before this decision came out, Trump used, as many will recall, a 1977 law called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to apply these tariffs, and using the threat of fentanyl for Canada specifically as being that threat. So this is sort of unique because no president had ever used this piece of legislation in this way previously. So Trump did this in a unique way. And what the Supreme Court found was that he does not actually have the authority to impose these tariffs. So that doesn't mean all tariffs he doesn't have the authority to impose, like some of the aluminum tariffs with China, or some of the aluminum tariffs with Canada, for example, and China tariffs are still going to remain. But essentially what's happened here is the Supreme Court has said, nope, that's actually Congress's responsibility because it's akin to imposing a tax, just sort of summarizing what the decision said. And so basically Trump was able to sort of in the short term, basically sign an executive order saying that he's going to invoke Section 122 of the Trade Act and impose a 10% global tariff for 150 days. But this will eventually expire in July, and we'll have to eventually go to Congress to decide on whether or not the United States wants to impose these tariffs on a sort of continued basis. Now, there's a few sort of issues, political, economic, and otherwise, that arise as part of this. Trump obviously is upset that he is not a king and not an authoritarian in the way where he can't just unilaterally make decisions like this. And if we are to believe that the rule of law and there's institutional strength in the United States, yes, he's able to sort of temporarily extend some of these tariffs, but rule of law and institutional power in the United States is still alive. And so what I'm going to be watching is how this situation shakes out from that perspective, because we've talked about it on this podcast before. We sometimes conflate the behavior of the current president of the United States and make judgments on how the United States as an institution and its institutions are, the health of those institutions versus looking at the actions of one individual. And I think what happens in the wake of this decision and how institutions do or do not bend to the will of the president on this will be a good litmus test on whether or not there's still strength and vitality in those institutions, and whether or not Trump's existence as president in the second term is going to have sort of long-ranging effects in that way. So that's the first thing that I'm looking at on this. More of a longer term outlook. A shorter term outlook is really about how this is going to impact the fiscal situation of the United States. So these tariffs were going to bring in a significant amount of money. I think around 1.4 trillion over a decade, right? And so this is obviously factored into a lot of the decisions that the Trump administration has made in terms of their fiscal position, which, by the way, isn't that great. We could talk about Ferguson's law, about how the United States is now currently spending more on debt servicing than they do on defense, which is an early indicator of a collapse of empires. So there's that aspect of it. We can get into talking about that a bit more. So there's the fiscal aspect of it. There's also the political aspect of it as well. So we do have those midterms coming up in November, and there's now increasing data and research that shows that actually the brunt of these tariffs is being paid for by the American consumer. And when we are in a situation where affordability and fragility at that household level is a big political question, the sort of question remains, what's going to happen in the midterms if 435 Congresspeople, 35 senators are going back to their districts and states respectively and talking to constituents. What are constituents saying? We do have polling data that says that Americans do not believe that the Trump administration is doing a good job on the economy. And so how does that sort of shake out? So just to sort of summarize, there's that sort of long-term institutional strength aspect of it. There's that shorter midterm economic aspect to it. And there's also the political aspect to it. And perhaps a fourth aspect that we were talking about before we started record, which is, okay, what does this send a signal of to countries like Canada and others about when Trump makes certain threats? How much can we rely on those threats following through? So I'll take a breath, pause for you to come in and comment on this, Joel, but that's sort of the bigger themes that we're seeing as part of this tariff decision.
I really appreciate that breakdown. I think that it helps clear my mind as to, and as I noted a little bit earlier, we have key themes, me specifically, when I'm looking at the market, and I believe that you addressed what I think is one of the core legs of that, the U.S. economy, and the affordability, the housing, and then the monetary policy portion is drastically has recently been impacted by this most recent ruling. And this then trickles down through a whole host of outcomes that are about to and need to be fleshed out by the market. And that being one, that you have the State of the Union, where he is going to address the state of his administration. The current, at least from what I can tell, perception of that is that they aren't doing a fantastic job. He's very loud, boisterous, but what is actually being accomplished? Where are we when it comes to affordability? And there's the looming reality of midterm elections, and the third leg being like the AI impact and technological impact of the paradigm shifting tech. And so we have, and what I want you to comment further on is the midterm elections. I'm reading through your notes here, and you got 435 seats in the House of Representatives that are 2-year terms. It's currently a Republican majority by about 4 seats, 218 to 214. 35 seats are up for re-election in Senate, and that is a 6-year rolling term. 33 regular elections, 2 special elections. The Republicans are defending 20 seats. The Democrats are defending 13. Democrats need to see a net gain of 4 seats to take the majority. Now, it seems as though the Senate is going to be very difficult for the Dems to win here, based on where the location is. There's a bunch of rural Senate seats, and if we're being honest with ourselves, as Republican to vote Republican. Give me your view on the House of Representatives. I generally just track the current percentage outcomes. I don't look at it as deeply as this, so this really helps. You believe that it's much closer to a toss-up than it is a guarantee that the Democrats are able to pick up enough seats in the House. Could you please kind of speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah, so we sort of talked about this in our predictions podcast as well, in terms of all the different things that are factoring into how voters are going to be casting their votes. And I mean, unlike in Canada and the United States, it's really between the Democrats and the Republicans. And so the question from my perspective really becomes, do people have more or less confidence that the Democrats are going to do a better job of bringing forth legislation that is going to be beneficial than Trump? And I think that we're in a unique situation where, while Trump may not be that liked from an economic lens, the relative weakness of the Democratic Party and the relative seemingly inability for them to pivot away from political strategies that are no longer working across the Western world is going to make it difficult. I think the broader question as well, in terms of how this breaks down in both the House as well as the Senate, is looking just in terms of the different responsibilities that each of these bodies have, which are different, right? So if you have only a small majority in the Senate, you have a ability, which is kind of similar to what we have right now, but you have this ability to, because you're responsible for appointments, judicial appointments, namely, you have an ability to do that, but you kind of lack the ability to have a legislative impact. You typically need about 60 seats or more to have that kind of legislative impact. And then, the question that people always ask is on impeachment, right? So there's a sort of dual responsibility in the legislative branch of the United States. So the House of Representatives brings forward accusations of impeachment, so the House, and it is the Senate who will convict and sort of try those impeachment charges as well. So when you look at the breakdown of that, even if you have a Democratic majority House, if impeachment is something that you're looking at, it's not a guarantee that you're going to be able to follow through on that if you don't also have the Senate. And then, of course, the appointments aspect is always a big deal as well. And then, of course, you can just have legislative gridlock because ultimately legislation goes to the president's desk to sign or veto. And so you can have a situation where if there's not bipartisan cooperation, you could have a situation where things are just stalled and gridlocked indefinitely, right? So that's what I'm looking at in terms of the breakdown. I think it's still too early to say how things are going to shake out. I don't have the confidence that the Democrats have done what is required to fill the vacuum of leadership that may or may not be present in the Trump administration. And I think that that's going to be a problem in the midterms. I think that it's going to be a struggle, and not saying that there's no hope. I think it's too soon to tell at this point, but yeah, I think it's going to be close. The Senate, I think, will continue to stay Republican, but
yeah, I think that's accurate. I also find it, and perhaps I'm wrong here, but what's the Democratic identity at the moment? They've run a few different candidates that have had some success, but they are vastly different from each other. I mean, if you're going to take any sort of directional indication from the Mamdani success as mayor in his campaign, and then you look at perhaps on the other side of things, I think that they haven't really found that Democratic identity quite yet. And that to me is somewhat concerning for a party that looks to take back the House and to lesser. I don't think it's going to happen in the Senate, but I want to just comment briefly on the impeachment. The United States tried this from 2016 to 2019, 2020, and they impeached him in the House multiple times and it never successfully got through the Senate. So I think that was mostly just hot air being released and made for a government that did absolutely nothing but create headlines rather than do any legislation. So I believe that maybe the Democrats will learn from their past mistakes and to avoid that and to try and accomplish something new and different. But I want to shift gears here a little bit, and I want to jump to, or let's suggest that we were going to go to 2028. We're going to time travel a little bit here, and over the weekend we had two viral positions on artificial intelligence. And for you and I pre-record, we spoke to how important we believe this current technological paradigm shift is. And this is to the spirit of the podcast, I think. I mean, I've referred to my podcast as Reformed Millennials for a very long time. And it's this belief that as millennials, we need to put it upon ourselves to learn and better prepare ourselves for an economy that's drastically changing and ever shifting underneath our feet. And if we are not willing to learn and to continue to learn and better arm ourselves, we will fall behind and become irrelevant. And I think that our generation has largely done a very good job of that over the last 6-7 years. However, I am noticing that there is some, I believe that people are paralyzed by this new technology. And oftentimes that paralyzation is because of anxiety. And I think that AI anxiety is somewhat obviously stemming from not knowing what AI is and not understanding how it works. And I think our generation was not prepared with the proper mental models to deal with it. And my prescription to this is that the solution to any anxiety is always action, and anxiety is a non-specific fear. And it's a non-specific fear that things are going to go poorly, and your brain and body are telling you something about it, and you're not sure what to do. And the best thing to deal with that is actually to lean in. You need to lean into your curiosity if that's something that you have, and you need to create some enthusiasm to sort of open up the hood and look under it and figure out how things are designed and structured. You have to understand what you want to accomplish and reverse engineer that technology to help it deliver you the outcomes you want. So when I read these AI doomerisms, this belief that in 2028 we're going to see an economy that effectively collapses on itself because artificial intelligence is going to outcompete all humans, and the way in which we've structured things is going to all fall apart. It's going to decimate white collar jobs. It's going to trigger a massive crisis in our mortgage markets, where the velocity of money, where we're buying and transacting in services and goods, is going to effectively erode to nothing because machines don't buy discretionary goods. I think that this AI doomerism porn that is being played over and over again in specific realms of the internet is really just an extension of misunderstanding and having anxiety over the technology that is dispersing and diffusing into the world. And I think that there's another side to all of this. And I believe that we're in the midst of what is likely going to be an abundance boom rather than an AI destruction of our core tenets of society. And interestingly, this Citrini research post that was shared millions of times and read tens of millions of times over the last, call it, 4 or 5 days, harkens back to a very similar story, which is socialism and Marxism. It is the belief that machinery will inevitably destroy all labor, and labor not having a place in the market. And what it ignores is human ingenuity and our ability to create new opportunity with new technology. And if we can then start to play that out and understand that Marxism in every case has failed and missed many points of what capitalism actually accomplishes and what humans with the proper incentive structure actually can accomplish, is a very important mental model to maintain and build upon. So with that framework, Mel, I want to kind of talk about this doomerism, this technology, the way in which it's diffusing, and hopefully inspire our generation and people that listen to this podcast to take it upon themselves to build with this technology, understand this technology, and allow for it to help them. Use it as leverage rather than something to be ashamed of. I find that in my line of work and the other lines of work in which I interact with, they are insecure about the technology itself. And I'm actually not. I'm also guilty of this, where somebody might accuse me of using it and then I reject it vehemently. There's, I think, going to be a period of time in which we're going to have to become comfortable with a new reality. And I believe that with all new technologies, early adopters and people that understand and get a good feel for it end up winning. And for those that perhaps need a mental model and a metaphor for this, I think that the Steve Jobs quote from many decades ago, a computer is a bicycle for the mind. It lets you travel much faster than walking, and it adds efficiency. And I think that this is, and AI specifically, is an extension of that. It's just a compounded computing. It is effectively a motorcycle for the mind. And what it allows and what it, I think, delivers us is a mechanism that the bicycle had, but it's a compounding effect of that. However, the motorcycle itself does not work without human direction. And if you can understand that and realize that it is a machine, not some biological thing that has a conscience and well, maybe it has a little bit of a conscience, but currently it's not a living, breathing thing. You need to understand that it's built to service us. And if that is the case, and if that is the incentive structure of the technology, you then need to leverage it and run with it. Because at the end of the day, all technologies have done a version of this. And each one of those technologies created new opportunity, whether it be for jobs or business, to build upon. So I guess what I'm trying to do is implore folks to not be paralyzed, and to lean into their anxiety that this new technology is creating, and to better understand it so that you too can be an early adopter and utilize it and leverage it to build something new for the incentive structure that exists, which is to provide human beings with things that they want. Because at the end of the day, that's really all the economy is. It is to deliver goods and services that humans want and desire. So Mel, I'm not sure this is a question so much as it is a thread that I want you to continue pulling on, because I believe it's important, and it is a paradigm and a shift. And if we don't continue to flush it out, I think we're doing a disservice to those that spend time listening to us.
Yeah, all really great points. I agree with everything that you're saying, and I think that part of what I think AI has pushed us to is uncomfortable to us in many ways. I'll speak for myself and just people that I'm speaking to on this, because AI is actually pushing us to self-reflect and analyze the sort of philosophical underpinnings of what it means to have a good life, what we actually want in life. When you have this endless and boundless resource of information and power and capability, to use your motorcycle analogy, when you have like the top of the line motorcycle, the fastest, the sleekest, the nicest tool that you have, but you don't know where to drive that motorcycle to, and you don't have any idea of where you'd like to go with that thing, the types of things that you'd like to do along the way, however powerful the tool that you're using, it won't actually result in a material benefit to your life, because that is really still the purview of human beings to decide what it is they want to pour their time and energy into, to decide the type of person they want to be, to decide how they want to take advantage of the opportunity for leverage that AI offers. And I think that's uncomfortable to millennials, perhaps, and to others for a number of reasons. But perhaps one of the reasons is that, we have grown up in a time where you kind of could just like get on a ride to certain roads to life and just do the things that you're supposed to do, that society tells you that you're supposed to do. And you may turn out okay, I'm going to graduate high school, I'm going to go to a good business school, I'm going to intern at a bank or a financial institution or an accounting firm, and I'm going to climb the ladder, and I'm going to do the things and work hard, and that's going to yield the type of life that I was promised. And I'm not going to actually have to think too hard about what to do about it. I just need to get on the ride and do the things that I'm being asked to do. Whereas in this AI era, it's a matter of, opting into the ride, but you have to decide exactly where that vehicle is going or that motorcycle is going once you get into it. And I think that's uncomfortable because of the boundless options. I think it's uncomfortable because we have not really taught ourselves as a society how to flex that muscle. And I think it's a different challenge that we're facing. And so what I was sort of saying before we started recording is AI is an immense opportunity, but it's not just about having the right skill set. It's about having the right mindset, and the mindset and curiosity to want to learn, to want to grow, to be okay with not being perfect in many ways, to be okay with being not so good at something for a while. I mean, most of us get into our late 30s, early 40s, and the concept of starting something new is uncomfortable because we're so used to being good at the thing that we're doing now. And so I think, just as you say, leaning into that discomfort is going to be valuable to millennials. And the last thing I'll say is, for all that's happened to millennials since the sort of mid 2000s over the course of our coming of age, I think that if you have the mindset of thinking of how all of those challenges, the financial crisis, geopolitical shifts, COVID, technology, AI, all of these things, if you think of those as learning opportunities to help meet the moment that we're in now, you're going to be much better prepared and positioned to benefit from these opportunities, is what I'd say.
Yeah. Okay. So I think you said a few important things that I'm going to continue to pull on. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but the only true test of intelligence is that you get what you want out of life. And right now, we are stepping on the pedal of economic and we are of the economy, and we are accelerating. You're seeing it in GDP prints, et cetera. This is to be expected, given that you would assume AI would produce higher output and better outcomes from that in that regard. The anxiety of what I deem the anxiety that's being created, I think, is also created because the anxiety being created is a result of a shifting reality with regards to those tracks that you spoke to. It was when we were 10 to 15 to 20 years old, a fairly obvious track to success was available. You had like financial tracks, education tracks, healthcare tracks that were and would result in a way of life and standard of living that you knew as a kid, based on the folks around you that traveled that path, had from a lifestyle perspective. That was you could trust that track to deliver you what you wanted out of life. Those tracks are breaking and fracturing. There's more tracks being created. However, the clarity of those tracks is not the same as it once was. And as a result of that, I think it's creating a ton of anxiety in the economy and for people, individuals. And the one thing that this unfortunately creates that I think is important is new opportunity. Now, opportunity, you can either view that as being a good thing or something that's scary. And I believe that this triggers a lot of folks because they've spent a lot of time, especially people in our 30s and 40s and 50s. Those folks are sort of in this position where like, no, I chose this track. This should deliver the outcome. My intelligence is being threatened. But the one thing that I believe is not properly dealt with in society is that it's continuous learning. And just because, and I think that this is just a reality of life, the exception of specific professions like a physician or a lawyer or something along those lines. The reality is that if you don't continue to learn and iterate, that track shifts underneath you, and then you no longer have, and you aren't going to be able to obtain the things in your life that make you happy. So it makes sense that it triggers folks that have master's degrees or were in management positions of roles that perhaps aren't relevant anymore. And they think that they're smart, but the landscape and the actual reality of intelligence is that you get what you want out of life. So now this definition actually, in my opinion, matters a lot because AI actually fails this test. This AI doesn't really want anything out of life. It's truthfully, it doesn't have a life, let alone the fact that it doesn't want anything. It doesn't live. However, its desires are also programmed by the human that's controlling it. So I think that this creates an opportunity, but also like a restructuring of how we need to view intelligence specifically, and also the incentive structure that is still consistent in our economy. And I believe that we need to measure our intelligence not by our underlying education or standard education, but now we need to remeasure our intelligence based on a continuing battlefield or an arena. And it's a relative construct of delivering a way of life that is something that the human wants. And we need to be able to be dynamic, more so than ever in any other part in human history. We need to be dynamic because of the very quickly shifting economy and reality of what delivers great results, what services human beings actually desire. And interestingly, the market right now is one destroying the market value of one specific economic assumption and then re-delivering value to one that in the past has been left for dead. And that is a presumption of value that is going to continue to remain the same, and one that is iterating and changing. And again, this comes back to early adopters and how they have an enormous edge over those that just ignore or are paralyzed by their anxiety. So I think that it's pretty true that, I mean, if you look at the current usage numbers, it's still sub 2 billion people that are actually using AI, and it's not because it's not accessible. And for the most part, most folks, those that are using it, aren't using it properly, or at least they aren't playing with it. It's not they are using it as though it is Google, when in reality they need to be stressing the latest models, trying new things, and applying it to domains that perhaps don't seem intuitive. And if you want to invest in the future and to take advantage of opportunity, you kind of have to live in the future. So you need to be an avid consumer of these technologies. And I think if you want to have the best insights and then have the best results, you need to figure out how to use it. And I understand that it's intimidating. I understand that when you press the wrong button, sometimes it gives you something you didn't want. But you got to try doing the wrong thing. You have to try looking like a dummy. You have to figure out complex interfaces. You have to figure out like how the relationships are going to work, because not everybody has yet. It is an unclear future. We don't know what the new roles are going to be. We don't know what the new services are going to be that this provides. And I think that is where folks need to kind of reset themselves, understand that the future is unknown and uncertain. However, if we are not doomers, and I come back to this quote from Morgan Housel all the time. I feel like I say it every day, but pessimists sound smart. People that are AI doomers sound smart. Optimists make money, and optimists harness technology and use it for their benefit. And that has been true for the last 100 years, and I am betting on it being true for the next 100. So that's my take on the current situation, and I'm hopeful that folks start to use it and teach themselves how to use it. It is probably one of the most powerful learning tools that has been created for society. It has driven down the cost of education to effectively zero. You can become an expert in almost anything if you just learn how to teach yourself. And I believe that the implications of that are quite pronounced and pretty incredible.
100%. And that is why I'm so long on the mindset aspect of it. I think that the barrier between where you are with this stuff and where you could be is much smaller than you probably think it is. And I think that the nice benefit and the equalizing effect that AI will have, not just in terms of how it democratizes knowledge, as you've said, but what is accessible to everyone on a sort of philosophical, emotional level, what is accessible to every human being is the ability to learn who you are, learn how to manage yourself and your emotions and your desires and how you go through life, and That, I think, is going to be a skill that is going to be a difference maker in today's society, because where knowledge is abundant and accessible, who you are as a human being, how you treat others, how you move through life, the focus that you have, being a regulated human being that people enjoy being around, and investing in that sort of creativity and growth mindset. People who have been living that way for a while and or have a desire to begin living that way, I think are going to be recipients of extraordinary opportunity on many different levels. And I think that I want to be a pessimist, or sorry, I want to be an optimist in this arena, because I want to make money and grow my business. And I just think that living in the misery of everything sucks, even if it does, like, let's even just say that that's true. Who wants to live that way until the end of the world, if that's really where we're going? That's not really, I would like to live in the best possible space, even if we are headed to a place that's not good, but I think we're headed to a place that's really good. So I agree with you on that point.
Where I want to finish this conversation is around the area in which I believe human beings are going to continue to have a structural advantage over AIs, and it is just an extension of a belief. I think we've talked about this on the podcast a million times, but it's the limits of AI are almost all directionally pointed at creativity. AI can solve like math problems that human beings would take thousands of multiples longer to do. And that is an incredible change and shift. That has been true for a long time, though. Calculators are better than human beings at mathematical problems. We've been speeding up calculation for decades. However, Steve Jobs said this. It's funny, I haven't quoted Steve Jobs this much in a very long time, but he said that creativity is just putting things together. And the best ideas are all stolen ones. And I think, interestingly, moving forward, I think creativity is much more in the domain of coming up with an answer that was not predictable or foreseeable from the question and from the elements that were already known. Like, it was, I think, and this benefits fairly out of bounds thinking. And these models are all trained on the averages, and they're all trained on information that human beings created and cultivated in the past. And we need to start asking ourselves, what can AI not do? Can it create a new genre of painting? No, not right now. It can't. Can it move humans with emotion and in a novel way? Not yet, not now. Can it invent entirely new scientific theories? Not that I know of. That may turn out to be true, but it's currently not. I do believe that its forward-looking prediction, while it will influence the way in which the world moves, it's not currently making decisions. We are still the top creative layer. We are still who it is serving. And the incentive structure of this infrastructure, these AI infrastructures, is to produce and service our outcomes. And that is important directionally. It is going to impact our markets, which stocks are going to work. The services in which benefit us will be the ones in which the most value accrue to. And we need to continue to understand that framework. So I guess as a closing, I'm not an AI doomer. I don't think you are either, Mel. I implore folks to view this more as an opportunity rather than something that is going to be the end of the world as we know it. And because, I mean, it hasn't paid to be a pessimist for any portion of my life. And
it also just isn't fun. And what the hell are we doing any of this for if we can't enjoy life a little bit from time to time?
Yeah. Naval has a really great quote, and it's in the doing that you learn.
Yeah.
So just, if anything, just try it. I think you'll be surprised.
Learn, earn, invest, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's all for today. Thanks for listening. If you found this valuable, please subscribe and share it with a friend. As always, the information on this podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be considered financial and/or tax advice. Please consult a licensed professional for your own personal situation. Joel is a registered portfolio manager and investment advisor, and clients of his and his firm may own securities discussed on this podcast.